they talked about was seeding every newborn with $1,000 stock portfolio and loading it up, buying $1,000, buying some ETFs, which puts him in the market. Now this kid's born with $1,000 and a stock account, and he's long the S&P, and he's 5 years old. 5 years later, and he's been long the S&P for 5 years, and maybe his $1,000 worth 1,800, and then he's 10 years old, and his $1,800 is now worth like $4,000, and he's 16 years old and getting out of high school, and he's got a $50,000 portfolio, depending on what is it and whether or not people add it to the portfolio.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Markets and Madness, the place where we discuss the madness that occurs when economics, politics, and personalities all move in different directions. Tim and I here today. Good morning, Tim. How you doing?
Hey there, Fred. How are you today?
Good. See a big day for the Dow, the Nasdaq, 700 points. Bitcoin rally.
It was up. The futures were up on the holidays. Futures were up like 300 or 400 over the holidays. So I don't know if this is obviously this is on top of that. And the big reaction was to Europe saying that they're going to fast track negotiations. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think people are getting a little, I don't want to say frustrated, but a little tired, of tariff on, tariff off, tariff on, tariff off, down 500, up 500. It's
he's
a
doing
tough
what he's
game.
got to do, though. I mean, he lit a fire under Europe,
Yeah.
and that was the plan. We had a good 2-year auction. Did you know that?
No, when was that?
Today. Went very well, which was a surprise.
I guess the 2 years the right maturity. When you go out in 10 and 20s, that's when it's having problems. I mean, if the Fed's going to do anything, if there's ever going to be any rate cuts, it's going to impact the front end. And I guess
Well,
2 years.
last week the 20-year went horrible, but the
Right.
20 years always been the kind of stepchild of the auction. Nobody ever liked the 20-year
Right.
maturities,
Right.
so they never really go spectacular anyway. I think probably the interesting thing is geopolitical. He announced some good news with Iran today, which flies in the face of what Iran's been saying.
Yeah.
He said Iran's getting close, but last week the Ayatollah said under no circumstances.
Yeah.
So who the hell knows what's happening behind closed doors on that? He seems happy with the Europeans taking steps.
Yeah. There's just, it's tough to trade. We had this the last time we talked about trading, investing, and you really have to be a trader in these markets, and you have to react to all of these sound bites. And it's a really tough business when you have a focus, you're looking at a plan, and all of a sudden a statement comes out and rocks that plan, and it goes. If you're lucky, it goes your way, and if you're not, you're underwater, and you scratch your head. What am I doing in this?
Well, for investors, it's this climate that he's building is going to be good for the next several years. So you got a lot of time to get on this train. So if you do think like we think, it's going to be a little sloppy getting there, then you can afford to wait. And this is a move, the bigger the move, the harder it is to time. And this is a giant move.
Well, I'm not even talking about the moves. I'm just talking about reacting to statements that come out of the blue. As you just said with Iran, the Ayatollah says, "No, we're not close." Trump says, "Oh, they're getting better." So, like, how do you play that game? Who do you believe? Who's right? Who's wrong?
I don't think you do. I don't think you do. I think you look at the charts and look at what the charts are telling you, and you sort of have to play the charts. These moves are massive, and we've said all along, since January, that volatility is your friend. and ride vols. As long as you own volatility, you can capture percentages of those moves in either direction.
Hmm. You just got to be quick. You just got to be quick because the statements come out of the blue. You know, it's tough to anticipate when somebody walks up to a microphone.
Well, I got a bunch of short positions on, and they got beat up pretty hard today.
Yeah,
Um,
felt better on Friday when everything was
I was
reversed.
very happy Friday, and I'm happy for this whole move. Really, since January, this has been a great market for me.
Yeah.
But the way I've chosen to play it is keep a lot of good technology stuck in my portfolio, and what's really helped is these quantum computer stocks.
You know, I was thinking about something the other day, something we've talked about. Um, and NVIDIA, I think, comes out with earnings this week, right? The idea that maybe it's long a basket of quantum stocks and short a basket of AI stocks like NVIDIA.
Really?
I don't know. It's just something muddling around in my head. You know, maybe you do it
I'm
by
not crazy about that because they do complement one another. They're not opposing forces.
one's not going to take over the other. That's what I thought the feeling was that
They're
quantum was.
complementary. One adds to the other, I think.
Yeah.
Um, you
All
might
right.
get more flows into quantum, but I don't think those flows are necessarily out of AI. I really don't know. I mean, we're in areas that's sort of beyond me. I've been riding the quantum wave for a while, and I'm very happy with that. And I just see that as long term because I'm a believer in the technology. I think it's a major game changer. It's hard to really understand why and
Alternate
explain it, but
universes and everything.
yeah, I mean, you're really talking about. You got to get very esoteric. You have to think about. It's those questions you used to ponder when you smoked a joint. Like, what is time? You know, time is
Bending time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Does it exist? Well, its measurement exists. I've never seen an inch, but I know an inch exists. You know,
Right.
so quantum computers all about that. But the fact is, they're really making gains with it now. You know, I saw it last week. A quantum computer solved something that took something like 4 billion years for a conventional computer to do. It did it in 5 minutes. You can't deny that technology. You could sit and say, I don't understand it. That's great. We don't understand it. But in terms of problem solving, can't be without it.
Regarding AI, I saw a clip this morning. I think it might have been the CEO of Goldman talking about IPOs. He said what used to take a team of six weeks to come up with on an IPO package, it takes AI minutes to get 95% of it. And then the last 5%, the details is where you get stuck in the mud. He says, but
Well, have you used Grok?
I haven't used Grok. I use Chat GBT.
I use Grok, and the stuff that comes out. I was thinking the other day, you could pay a research team to do that, and it shows up instantly. And it's pretty good. It gives you a very thorough response, not just a paragraph, but several bullet points and paragraphs within that. It's pretty impressive. And I mean, if you really think about the workforce, I mean, what's happening? You know, we used to hire 5 people to do a job now. An AI computer does it. In 2 years, less, probably 18 months, you're not going to need two-thirds of the drivers we have moving cars and equipment. Truck drivers, I've always wondered what happens when they start to make self-driving trucks. You know, Amazon deliveries are showing up with trucks and drones. I mean, these you can't deny this. These are life-changing events.
Yeah. Yeah. Waves and they're coming in waves.
I had a conversation with a guy in an Uber. He was driving an Uber, and this had to be 4 years ago. And I asked him that question. I said, someday we're going to have self-driving cars. What's that going to do to Uber? He said, well, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and buy 3 cars. And he'll just pimp them out, you know. And I thought about that for a long time, and I thought, yeah, that's right. As a worker gets furloughed because he's been sort of transitioned out of the workforce, what is he going to do? He's going to let his capital work for him. Basically, you have capitalism is thrust upon the blue collar worker. You know, the guy's got to take his 401k. You know, this last big beautiful package, one of the things they talked about was seeding every newborn with $1,000
Right.
stock portfolio, and loading it up, buying $1,000, buying some ETFs, which puts him in the market. Now this kid's born with $1,000 and a stock account, and he's long the S&P, and he's 5 years old. 5 years later, and he's been long the S&P for 5 years, and maybe his $1,000 worth 1,800, and then he's 10 years old, and his $1,800 is now worth like 4 grand, and he's 16 years old and getting out of high school, and he's got a $25,000-$50,000 portfolio, depending on what is in and whether or not people add it to the portfolio. Yeah, I had an idea years ago. You may remember it. I even filed for the name. The company was Give a Share. I really thought for gifts you can give somebody a gift certificate, and it got bogged down with the operational area. I looked into an omnibus account and how to do it, and I guess if I would have pursued it, it probably would have been around now. But the idea was to give a kid a stake in capitalism. And that's where we're going, because if you don't have a stake in capital, if you don't have assets to deploy, you can't rely on your hands. Yeah, trade schools are good and all of that, but this technology is bypassing, you know, just making people redundant.
Just going back to your give a share, I know as of, I guess it was 5 years ago, maybe more, that stock companies were offering fractional shares. So you don't have to buy 1 share of IBM. You could buy $40 worth of IBM.
Yeah, right.
$100 stock if you want to buy, $20 worth of Berkshire Hathaway.
But it didn't catch on as gift giving. The idea, a kid graduates high school, what do you get him? You should give him like an ETF worth, $150 or something instead of a check for $150. And I think that's really how we're gonna survive. I mean, we
Yeah,
talked about blue collar workers, how they're not blue collar workers anymore. They're computer operators and technicians. And once they become that, well, then it's just a simple chip or a code that gets transmitted to the computer, and you don't need the guy anymore.
yeah, and there are um, what are they calling it? 3D printing houses and everything else. So construction industry is changing.
Yeah. What did I read about that the other day? Somebody created they were 3Ding body parts. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, we're going off field here. I really think that the point is you stay with AI and you stay with quantum, and these are revolutionary technologies that are here for the next decade or so, and that's the market.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. What do you think of the metals? Gold is having a setback today.
Yeah, I think gold is fine. You know, you look at this rally, and you said nibble at these positions, and that's kind of what you got to do in this volatility, these kinds of markets. You know, um, I think the dollar has to find its floor, and it hasn't found it yet, and I don't think that's gonna change. You know what? Let's just introduce the J curve here. We've got a J curve effect once the tariffs and the trade deals are consummated. And none of us know how long that's going to take, but I'm operating on the assumption that everything Trump does, he does the quickest way possible. I got to have this thing done before the midterm election, and I got to show results before the midterm election. So if you have a J curve, which means a lag before things really start to take effect, even if he gets his deals sewed up and done, and the corporations get their deals, and these companies start to break in their new trading partners, and all of that takes place, you're not going to see the effects on the flows for a while. So if he wants to see it done by the next election, he's got to have it done right away. And that's all the pressure to get things done. The bill passed by July 4th and everything done. By October, November. Now I'll give it a little longer. By next by year end, he's gotta have things in place, and then you still got a lag before it hits the economy. So
Yeah, and that's been the problem. We're 4 months into this presidency. We're coming to the end of May, right? We're almost half a year, and we still have more, I guess you'd call it confusion more than anything else.
and we have an impatient society.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, Trump was in office for a week when I started to hear he hasn't brought the price of eggs down.
right. Price of eggs. Yeah.
I mean, this electorate is impatient and unrealistic. They're not willing to accept leads and lags.
We
And,
still
and the
have
market's a reaction to that, I think.
yeah, and we still have the war with Ukraine and Russia, and that's not getting any better.
Boy, it
So
looks worse, doesn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He
And
thinks,
that was one of the things he said it was gonna be done. First day he's in office, we was gonna get that fixed. And we're 4 months later, and it looks uglier.
yeah, well, you can lead a horse to water, but Zelensky was a problem, and Putin's a problem. They don't want peace. They're not done.
And how does that put the global climate? Where does that put everybody in check? Is it the world against Russia again?
Well, it's certainly the world's budget against Russia. I mean, everybody's sort of come to that conclusion. They're all moving themselves up to 5% defense
GDP?
spending of
Yeah.
GDP. So that's been a strain on the budgetary process. It's great for defense. We talked about that a while ago when you said, oh, these Doge cuts are going to hurt defense. First thing I said was Europe is going to buy defense
Yeah.
products, and they are. Defense stocks
And
have
we
really.
haven't seen the Doge cuts in our defense. They don't vote them in. They don't give Doge the power to do what they need to do.
Yeah. Well, I think Trump needs a little more credibility, and we're a little ways from that. It's an impatient society, and we've got lags coming up, and they're not ready to sit through lags.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's the same story we've been selling all along, and it's happening. It is true. So
Yeah.
it's another week of watch and see.
Yeah.
We
Hurry up and wait.
get hit with the tape bombs again.
Yeah. I mean, oil, gold, Bitcoin, and Bitcoin. It's approaching. I guess it's all-time highs, 110,000 for Bitcoin. And there's a lot of talk about the Trump coin and what he's done, and he's raising money to buy Bitcoin. It leaves a bad taste in your mouth, that whole Trump coin.
Yeah, yeah. This is the daggers are out, and they've been out for a while. And he looks weak because the legs are hurting him. Congress is hurting him too. I mean, the Republicans are shooting themselves in the ass. They're going to pass this thing. I think they're just leveraging their position to extract as much out of it as they can. They'll drop salt down at 30,000, I think.
But that's the problem. You can't have any meaningful reduction in the deficit if everybody wants their pound of flesh, right?
Well, I'm convinced, what we said last week, I'm convinced that they've looked at this now and said, we're not going to be able to cut the spending the way we want to. And the only answer is to grow our way out of it. And it's all about growth. Make the expenditures a smaller percentage of GDP by growing GDP. That's their only answer.
Yeah. and it's disappointing because I thought he was going to make a big effort in cutting spending,
He doesn't
and
have the he doesn't have the votes.
nobody
Johnson
has the
doesn't have the
appetite.
votes, and they're
Yeah,
not in the Senate. They don't. That's why the midterm means so much. If he doesn't, if they lose, if the Republicans move the midterm, this whole this whole package, this whole foundation is in jeopardy. Then we got 2 years of gaps and waits, so we could really be in trouble. Because one of the things we said is this is a great plan if they let him govern, and and he's got until the midterms, and that's what it boils down to. So he does everything he does looks like a panic, but all he's really trying to do is get things done before the midterm. What
get
he's
it
done
over
with
the
the
hill.
tariffs has
Yeah,
brought people to the table faster than anybody ever thought possible. He has done that. You know, it used to be, oh, a, a, a
yeah, committee.
over, and they'll iron out some details. Then we'll be back to you in the fall. And he's changed all of that by saying, look, you got 2 weeks, and I'll give you if you come to the table and negotiate, I'll give you a few more. And he's getting pressure for that. But that's the only way it gets moved. Gets
Yeah,
done.
Congress isn't supportive. The Senate's pushing back. It, you know, I guess it was the same when Obama was president, and the far left felt he wasn't doing enough, and they pushed back on some of the things he wanted to get done. And now you have the right and the conservative and the budget conservatives, the budget hawks, are pushing back on Trump. Like, no, you're not cutting. I'm not signing this because you're not cutting the deficit. You're growing the deficit. So
Yeah,
it's
but they won't factor in any growth.
yeah,
I mean, it's a
they don't
static
believe it.
it's a
They don't
static
believe it.
analysis. Huh? I mean, you tell me, you create the changes in the tax code that he's creating. There's no way that this economy stays static. Absolutely no way. We could jump 1%, and 1% of GDP is $4 trillion in tax revenue. That changes everything
Yeah.
overnight. But they're not willing to look at that. When we did the analysis for the bank, when we did the balance sheet analysis, we would put on um, optimistic, pessimistic, and most likely. And we always had three scenarios we worked from. You're telling me the Congressional Budget Office is can't run three scenarios? They only run one, and it's static. You assume the economy is not going to respond at all in either direction. I mean, wow.
Yeah, it is a stretch, but I can only assume that the lawmakers just don't believe it.
Well, if they don't believe it, then at least run a worst case scenario.
Yeah,
If they don't believe it, then they think the economy is, they still think the economy is going to stay the same with a $1 trillion package. I don't know. It just boggles my mind. And try to explain this to somebody, and immediately their political bias falls in and overtakes the conversation. You can't really have. I said to somebody the other day at my meeting, I said, "Look, I prefer to talk to market people." He said, "Why?" I said, "When you're in the market for a living, you can't afford a bias. You can't afford to. You have to look at it and say, look, I really wish this would happen, but realistically, it's not going to happen. This is what I think is going to happen." And if you say, "Well, gee, I wish it's going to happen, and I bet this way," you're on the unemployment line. You can't last. So market people tend to be a little more realistic with respect to outcomes, whereas people who are not and didn't have to meet a P&L for a living, they can afford to live in fantasy world. It doesn't cost them
right.
their jobs.
Take their punt and move on. Yeah, yeah,
Well, all right. I don't think we
yeah,
can go much further today.
yeah. Not much else to say. Just
We were in the
stay the
doldrums.
course. Yeah,
The market's 700 points up. And we're saying we're in the doldrums, but
It's true. It's true. Summer's going to be interesting.
all
All
right,
right, Tim. Have a great night.
take care.
Bye.